If you walked into your office one morning and found the CEO's son sitting in your executive chair, declaring the company was his, and barking orders at your team, what would you do? I'd spent 15 years building my career at Sterling Dynamics. It took only 15 minutes for everything to nearly crumble. I thought I'd lose it all, until I realized I held a weapon of mass destruction that Bradley Sterling never saw coming. My name is Natalie Harper, and at 42, I'd earned every gray hair hidden beneath my professionally colored auburn locks. As Chief Financial Officer of Sterling Dynamics, I commanded respect in Denver's cutthroat industrial manufacturing sector. That Tuesday morning in March, I'd just wrapped up a grueling audit meeting that had started at 6:30 a.m. and stretched past noon. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I made my way back to the executive suite, already mentally preparing for the quarterly reports waiting on my desk. The first sign something was wrong. My assistant, Maria, wasn't at her desk. The second. The door to my corner office stood wide open. I always locked it. Always. I rounded the door frame and froze. There. Lounging in my custom ergonomic chair, the one I'd special ordered to combat 15 years of corporate-induced back pain, sat Bradley Sterling, 35 years old, trust fund baby, and the CEO's only son. His Armani-clad form looked absurdly out of place against my meticulously organized workspace. His feet, sporting what I recognized as $3,000 Berluti Oxfords, rested carelessly on my glass desk, right atop the Singapore contracts I'd spent 3 weeks negotiating. "Natalie," he said, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Good, you're here. We need to talk about some changes." I felt my jaw tighten, but years of boardroom battles had taught me to keep my expression neutral. "Bradley, is there a reason you're in my office?" He finally looked up, and the smirk on his face made my skin crawl. It was the same expression I'd seen countless times over the years at company Christmas parties where he'd gotten drunk and hit on interns, at board meetings where he'd shown up late and unprepared, at every family event where Robert Sterling had to apologize for his son's behavior. "Haven't you heard?" He swung his feet off my desk with theatrical flair, scattering papers across the floor. "Dad's retiring. Doctor's orders." That stroke really did a number on him. He stood, straightening his tie. "Which means Sterling Dynamics needs new leadership, my leadership." I kept my voice steady. "The board hasn't announced any succession plans. Your father is still recovering, and the board will do what I tell them." He interrupted, walking around my desk like he owned it, like he owned everything. "I've already started making arrangements. Called a meeting with your finance team for 2 p.m. Told them to prepare for some significant fund transfers, new partnerships I'm bringing in. My finance team, the department I'd built from the ground up, hiring each analyst personally, mentoring them, protecting them from corporate politics, the same team that had helped Sterling Dynamics increase revenue by 300% during my tenure. "You have no authority to call meetings with my staff," I said, feeling heat rise in my chest. Bradley laughed, actually laughed, and pulled out his phone. "Want to bet I sent this email an hour ago from the CEO account?" He showed me the screen. Sure enough, there was a company-wide email announcing Bradley Sterling as interim CEO, effective immediately. "That's not possible. The board needs to vote. There are procedures." "Procedures." He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Alcohol. At 1 in the afternoon. "Let me explain how this works now. Natalie, my father is incapacitated. I have power of attorney. I control his 51% stake. The board can either play ball or find themselves replaced at the next shareholder meeting." He brushed past me toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Oh, and Natalie, that 2 p.m. meeting isn't a request. Your team already confirmed attendance. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The door closed behind him with a soft click that might as well have been a gunshot. I stood there, alone in my violated office, staring at the scattered papers on the floor. 15 years of dedication, of sacrifice, of missed family dinners and canceled vacations, all of it threatened by a man who'd never worked an honest day in his life. But as I bent to collect the Singapore contracts, a cold clarity settled over me. Bradley Sterling had just made a critical error. He'd assumed I was just another executive he could bulldoze. He had no idea about the files I'd been collecting, the evidence I'd gathered, the weapon I'd been forced to forge over the past 8 months. He wanted to play corporate warfare fine, but he'd just declared war on the wrong CFO. The irony wasn't lost on me as I picked up the framed photo from my desk, Robert Sterling and me at the company's 20th anniversary gala. His arm around my shoulder like a proud father. That was 5 years ago, when Sterling Dynamics had just landed the Boeing contract that would transform us from a regional player into a national force. I'd worked 70-hour weeks for 6 months to make those numbers work, to prove we could handle the scale. Robert had called me his secret weapon in his toast that night. I'd started at Sterling Dynamics as a junior accountant, fresh from my MBA, drowning in student loans and desperate to prove that a girl from suburban Detroit could make it in Denver's Old Boys Club. Robert had noticed me during my 3rd year, not because I was brilliant, but because I'd caught a $2 million error in our tax filings that would have triggered an IRS audit. Instead of taking credit himself, like most executives would have, he'd promoted me on the spot. "You've got the instincts of a bloodhound," he'd said, his weathered face breaking into that rare smile. "I need someone like you watching my back." Over the years, he became more than a boss. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, Robert had personally arranged for the company jet to fly her to MD Anderson for treatment. When my marriage fell apart, my ex-husband couldn't handle having a wife who out-earned him by triple. Robert had quietly ensured I got the time and space I needed to rebuild. He'd walked me down the aisle at my sister's wedding when our father couldn't make it. In every way that mattered, Robert Sterling had been family, which made Bradley's existence all the more painful to witness. Where Robert was strategic, Bradley was impulsive. Where Robert built relationships, Bradley burned bridges. The son had inherited his father's sharp features and commanding height, but none of his wisdom or work ethic. I'd watched Bradley stumble through the company for years a week in marketing before he got bored, a month in operations before he insulted the wrong union rep, 6 months as VP of Strategic Initiatives, a made-up title that essentially meant Robert was paying him to stay away from anything important. The failures outside Sterling Dynamics were even more spectacular. There was the restaurant in Boulder that closed after 3 months when the health department found violations that made the evening news. The tech startup that burned through $2 million in investor money, Robert's friends, naturally before anyone realized Bradley's revolutionary app was just a poorly coded copy of Instagram. The import-export business that ended with a federal investigation. Though Robert's lawyers managed to keep Bradley's name out of the papers, each failure followed the same pattern: grand promises, other people's money, spectacular collapse, and Robert quietly cleaning up the mess. I'd processed the checks myself, watched millions disappear into Bradley's black holes of ambition. Robert never said it out loud, but I saw the resignation in his eyes every time Bradley's name appeared on an expense report. "He's still my son," Robert once told me after Bradley's 4th time seeking help. "What else can I do? Just stand by and watch him fall apart." But now Robert was lying in a private room at Presbyterian St. Luke's, recovering from a stroke that had stolen his speech and half his mobility. The doctors said he might recover, might regain function, but it would take months, maybe years. And in that window of vulnerability, Bradley had seen his opportunity. I pulled up the corporate bylaws on my computer, searching for any loophole, any procedural requirement Bradley might have missed. But he was right about one thing with power of attorney over Robert's shares. He technically had the votes. The board could fight it. But that would mean a protracted legal battle while the company bled talent and contracts. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom Rodriguez, my head of accounts payable. "Natalie, what the hell is going on? This kid just demanded we prep wire transfers for almost $1 million. No documentation, no approval chains. This can't be legal." I stared at the message, feeling pieces click into place. Bradley wasn't just making a power grab. He was accelerating something that had already been in motion. Those suspicious transfers I'd been tracking, the shell companies, the doctored invoices. He must have known I was getting close to exposing him. The stroke had given him the perfect cover to take control before I could build an airtight case. But Bradley had just revealed his desperation. And desperate people make mistakes. I texted Tom back, "Stall. Document everything. Recording devices are legal in Colorado if one party consents. I consent." Then I opened my private safe, the one hidden behind a false panel in my credenza, and pulled out the folder I'd been building for 8 months. 2.6 million in fraudulent transfers, shell companies in Delaware and Nevada, forged signatures on vendor contracts. It was almost enough to bury him. Almost. But if Bradley wanted to play interim CEO, if he wanted to raid the company coffers in broad daylight with my entire team as witnesses, well, he was about to hand me the rope I needed to hang him. I straightened my blazer, touched up my lipstick, and prepared for 2 p.m. Bradley thought he was walking into a treasury he could plunder. He was actually walking into a trap 15 years in the making, 8 months ago. I'd noticed it purely by accident. I'd been reviewing quarterly expense reports at 11 p.m. on a Friday. The glamorous life of a CFO, when a number made me pause. $17,000 for consulting services from a company called Meridian Solutions. The amount itself wasn't unusual. We hired consultants all the time, but the approval signature was Bradley's. And according to our systems, Bradley didn't have approval authority for anything over $5,000. Curious. I'd pulled the vendor file for Meridian Solutions. The paperwork looked legitimate at first glance: tax ID number, Denver address, professional website, but something felt off. The website was too perfect, too generic. Stock photos of smiling business people. Lorem ipsum text that someone had forgotten to replace on the About Us page. No actual names or employee profiles. I'd driven to the address that Sunday morning. It was a UPS store in a strip mall. Box number 447. Meridian Solutions was a ghost. That $17,000 was just the beginning. Once I knew what to look for, the pattern emerged like blood in water. Dynamic Consulting Group, $43,000. Sterling Assessment Partners, $91,000. Colorado Business Initiatives, $160,000. All approved by Bradley. During the 6 months he'd been VP of Strategic Initiatives. All paid to companies that existed only on paper and in post office boxes across Denver. The sophistication evolved over time. The early schemes were almost amateur invoices clearly generated from the same word template. Websites all registered on the same day. But by month 3, Bradley had gotten smarter, or more likely, he'd found someone smarter to help him. The newer shell companies had elaborate backstories, fake LinkedIn profiles for non-existent employees, even staged photos of supposed corporate events. I'd started building my case methodically, the way Robert had taught me. Document everything, verify twice, never show your hand until you hold all the cards. I'd hired a forensic accountant named James Morrison, a former FBI financial crimes investigator who now ran a private practice. What he found made my stomach turn. "Your boy isn't just stealing," James had told me over secure phone. "He's built an entire ecosystem. These shell companies are invoicing each other, creating a paper trail that looks like legitimate business activity. He's washing the money through 3, sometimes 4 layers before it hits his personal accounts." How much total? From what I can trace, 2.6 million over 8 months. But here's the kicker: the amounts are accelerating. Last month alone was 400,000. Bradley must have been funding something specific. The gambling debts I'd heard whispers about another failed business venture blackmail I didn't know. And frankly, I didn't care. Theft was theft. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Our IT director, Kevin Park, had approached me quietly one afternoon. "Natalie, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you need to know. Bradley asked me to give him admin access to the financial systems, full override capabilities." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd need written authorization from you or Mr. Sterling." Kevin had looked uncomfortable. He said he'd get it. That was a week ago, yesterday. I found someone had tried to hack into our system using sophisticated spoofing techniques. They almost got in. I'd immediately implemented additional security protocols, dual authentication requirements that even Bradley couldn't override without triggering alerts. But it was clear he was getting desperate. The stroke had probably accelerated his timeline. With Robert incapacitated, Bradley saw his window closing. Either he seized control now, or risked me exposing everything when Robert recovered. The investigation file in my safe had grown to 3 inches thick. Bank records showing transfers to Bradley's personal accounts in the Caymans. Screenshots of the fake websites before Bradley could take them down. Emails between Bradley and someone using the alias Phoenix discussing the arrangements. Sworn affidavits from 3 former employees who'd been fired after questioning suspicious invoices. But my crown jewel was the recording from 6 weeks ago. Bradley had been drunk at a company event, cornering one of my junior analysts, Derek, near the bathroom. "You know what your problem is," Bradley had slurred. "You think this company runs on rules and procedures, but rules are for people who don't have power. When my father finally kicks it, I'm going to show everyone how business really works. First thing I'm doing, cleaning house and finance, starting with that bitch Natalie." Derek, smart kid that he was, had been recording on his phone for his own protection. He'd brought it to me the next morning, pale and shaking. "I don't want to get involved, Miss Harper, but you needed to hear this." Now, sitting in my office at 1:45 p.m., I reviewed everything one more time. The forensic accounting report, the shell company documentation, the security breach attempts, the recording, individually. Each piece was damaging. Together, they painted a picture of a man who'd been systematically robbing his father's company while planning a hostile takeover. I locked the originals back in my safe and placed copies in my briefcase. Then I activated the recording app on my phone and slipped it into my blazer pocket. Colorado was a one-party consent state for recordings. As long as I was part of the conversation, everything Bradley said would be admissible. My computer chimed. An email from Bradley, sent to the entire finance department, meeting in conference room A in 10 minutes, mandatory attendance, Project Mercury briefing. Project Mercury. Even his code names were pretentious. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and headed for what Bradley thought would be his coronation. Instead, it would be the beginning of his downfall. Conference room A was packed. My entire finance team, 23 people who'd become like family over the years, sat around the mahogany table looking confused and concerned. Bradley stood at the head, a PowerPoint presentation glowing behind him with the title, Project Mercury Restructuring Sterling Dynamics for Global Domination. I slipped in quietly, taking a seat near the door. Bradley's eyes found me immediately, his smirk widening. "Good, we're all here," he announced, clicking his remote. The slide changed to a complex organizational chart with his name at the top. "As you've heard, I'm taking the helm of Sterling Dynamics. My father's vision was admirable for its time, but we need fresh blood, new perspectives, and aggressive expansion." Sarah Martinez, my senior analyst, raised her hand. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, has the board approved this restructuring?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "The board serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. I control that majority now. Through power of attorney while your father is incapacitated," I said calmly. Every head turned to me. "That's not quite the same as ownership, is it?" "Semantics," Bradley waved dismissively. "Let's focus on what matters. Project Mercury involves strategic partnerships with several consulting firms I've been cultivating. We need to move fast. Tom, I need you to prepare wire transfers totaling $900,000 by close of business today." Tom Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's a significant sum. I'll need documentation, vendor contracts, approval chains." "You'll need what I tell you to need," Bradley snapped, the mask of professionalism cracking. "These partnerships are time-sensitive. We miss this window. We lose the opportunity." "What partnerships exactly?" I asked, pulling out my legal pad as if to take notes. "Which consulting firms, what services are they providing?" Bradley clicked to the next slide, a list of 5 company names. I recognized 3 immediately from my investigation. Shell companies, every one. Synergy Global Advisors, Quantum Strategic Solutions, Peak Performance Partners. Bradley read off. These firms specialize in market penetration strategies for the Asian markets. They have connections we need. Interesting, I said, making a show of writing. And they all require payment today. That's unusual. Most legitimate consulting firms work on net 30 terms. These aren't most firms. Bradley's voice was getting tighter. They're exclusive. They choose their clients carefully. Derek, my junior analyst who Bradley had cornered weeks ago, spoke up. Miss, Harper is right. This violates our vendor onboarding procedures. We need tax documentation, insurance certificates, conflict of interest disclosures. Procedures. Bradley slammed his hand on the table, making several people jump. This is exactly the kind of bureaucratic thinking that's been holding this company back. We have an opportunity to triple our revenue in 18 months, and you're worried about paperwork. I'm worried about federal wire fraud charges, Tom said quietly. The room went silent. Bradley's face flushed red. Are you questioning my judgment, my authority? I'm questioning the legitimacy of wiring $900,000 to companies that didn't exist 6 months ago, Tom replied, pulling out his phone. I did some research. Synergy Global Advisors was incorporated in Delaware exactly 183 days ago. No employees on LinkedIn, no client testimonials, no physical address except a P.O. box. Bradley moved around the table toward Tom, his body language threatening. You're treading on dangerous ground. I could have you fired right now. Then fire me. Tom stood his ground. But I'm not processing fraudulent transfers. My signature isn't going on wire authorizations to shell companies. How dare you? He's right, I interrupted, standing slowly. In fact, I'm curious about something. Bradley, these companies you're so eager to pay, they wouldn't happen to be related to the $2.6 million that's already been transferred to similar entities over the past 8 months. Would they? The color drained from Bradley's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because I have documentation of 47 transfers authorized with your forged signature, all to companies with the same registration pattern as these 5. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check something. Dynamic Consulting Group, Sterling Assessment Partners, Colorado Business Initiatives. Should I continue? This is ridiculous. You're making accusations without proof. Proof? I smiled coldly. Like the email you sent to someone called Phoenix discussing, and I quote, accelerating the extraction before the old man recovers. Bradley lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. Several team members stood, creating a barrier between us. You've been monitoring my emails. That's illegal. No, but fraud is, embezzlement is, forging signatures on financial documents is, I kept my voice level, professional. And attempting to steal another $900,000 in front of 23 witnesses, that's just stupid. Bradley's hands were shaking now, rage and panic warring on his face. You're done, Natalie. You're all done. When I'm through, none of you will work in this industry again. I'll bury you in lawsuits until you're begging. Mr. Sterling, Maria, my assistant, spoke from the doorway. There are some gentlemen here to see you. They say it's urgent. 2 men in dark suits entered the conference room. FBI badges glinted at their belts. Bradley Sterling. The taller one spoke. I'm Agent Jeffries. This is Agent Kumar. We need to speak with you about some financial irregularities at Sterling Dynamics. Bradley looked at me, his face twisted with fury and disbelief. You actually called the FBI? No, I said truthfully. But when Tom reported your demands this afternoon, he was obligated to file a suspicious activity report with FinCEN. Financial institutions and their officers are required to report potential money laundering. It's federal law. The agent stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, we're going to need you to come with us. This is a setup she's framing me. My father will hear about this. Your father already knows. a familiar voice said from the doorway. We all turned. Robert Sterling stood there, supported by a walker but very much alert. His speech was slow but clear. I've been recovering faster than... We led on. Natalie has been keeping me informed. The trap had been sprung, but the real show was just beginning. The FBI agent stepped back, allowing Robert Sterling to enter the conference room fully. His appearance had been carefully orchestrated. I'd been coordinating with his medical team and his lawyers for 3 weeks. The stroke had been real. Yes, but his recovery had progressed faster than we'd publicly acknowledged. We'd kept it quiet, letting Bradley think he had free rein while we built our case. Dad, Bradley's voice cracked. You don't understand. Natalie's been plotting against me, against us. She's trying to take over the company. Robert's eyes, still sharp despite his physical weakness, fixed on his son. The only person plotting here is you, Bradley. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the 45-page dossier I'd compiled. Robert, the board of directors, and federal investigators have all received copies of this report. 8 months of forensic accounting, documented fraud, and evidence of conspiracy to embezzle corporate funds. You can't prove anything, Bradley said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, Agent Jeffries interjected. Miss, Harper's documentation is quite thorough. Combined with the suspicious activity reports filed by multiple banks over the past quarter, we have more than enough for federal charges. I clicked on my laptop, projecting emails onto the conference room screen. Let's review. Shall we? January 15th, $17,000 to Meridian Solutions for consulting services that were never performed. February 3rd, $43,000 to Dynamic Consulting Group, a company registered to a P.O. box in Aurora. March through August, accelerating transfers totaling $2.6 million. Each slide showed bank records, forged documents, and email correspondence. My team watched in stunned silence as the scope of Bradley's theft became clear. But here's the truly damaging part. I continued, clicking to an audio file. This recording from today's meeting, where you attempted to coerce my team into processing another $900,000 in fraudulent transfers. I hit play. Bradley's voice filled the room. You'll need what I tell you to need. These partnerships are time-sensitive. Then Tom's voice, I'm worried about federal wire fraud charges. And Bradley's response, are you questioning my authority? That's taken out of context, Bradley protested. The context, I said, is 23 witnesses who heard you trying to force illegal wire transfers to shell companies you created. Robert moved slowly to the table, his hand trembling as he lowered himself into a chair. Bradley, why? For a moment, Bradley's mask completely fell. Why you want to know why? Because you were never going to give me the company. 15 years I've waited, watching you groom her. He pointed at me, like she was your real successor, your work daughter, while your actual son got table scraps and made-up titles. You never wanted to work. Robert said sadly, every opportunity you squandered. Because nothing was ever good enough for you, yes. I took the money, I earned it, for putting up with the humiliation of being the CEO's failure son. Agent Kumar stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, that sounded remarkably like a confession. You should know you have the right to remain silent. I want my lawyer, Bradley said immediately. Good idea. I said, pulling out one final document. You'll need one, because in addition to federal wire fraud and embezzlement charges, there's also the matter of conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. I showed a printed email. This is correspondence between you and a competitor, Apex Industrial, discussing the sale of proprietary Sterling Dynamics technology. The FBI Cybercrimes Division is particularly interested in this. Bradley's face went white. That's fake. You fabricated that. Your laptop's browser history and the metadata on the email say otherwise. Kevin Park spoke up from the corner. I've provided everything to the authorities, with board approval. Robert stood slowly, supporting himself on the table. Bradley, you're my son, Despite everything, I love you, but I cannot, will not, let you destroy what 3 generations built. Touching family moment, Agent Jeffrey said dryly. But we need to go, Mr. Sterling. You're under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. As Agent Kumar read Bradley his Miranda rights, I watched the man who'd tried to destroy everything I'd worked for get handcuffed in front of my entire team. There was no satisfaction in it, only a hollow sense of necessity. Bradley looked at me one last time as they led him toward the door. This isn't over. Natalie, you think you've won. My lawyers will destroy you. I'll sue you for defamation, for illegal surveillance, for... Bradley, Robert interrupted, his voice stronger now. Shut up, before you make it worse. The agents escorted Bradley out, his threats echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors finally silenced him. The conference room remained quiet for a long moment. Then Tom spoke. Natalie, how long have you known? 8 months, I admitted. But I needed ironclad proof. Bradley's not wrong about having good lawyers. If I'd moved too early, he would have slipped away and destroyed evidence. So you let him steal $2.6 million, Derek asked. Every dollar is traceable. I assured them. The FBI will freeze his accounts. Most of it will be recovered. And more importantly, Sterling Dynamics is safe. Robert cleared his throat. I owe all of you an apology, my son, my failure as a father, put this company at risk. Natalie protected you, protected all of us, when I couldn't. Robert, I said gently, you should rest. The doctor said not to overexert yourself. He nodded but remained standing. One more thing, effective immediately. With board approval already secured, Natalie Harper is promoted to President and Chief Operating Officer. When I retire, which will be soon, she'll be my recommendation for CEO. The room erupted in applause. Sarah whistled. Tom shouted, About damn time! Even Derek, usually so reserved, was grinning. I felt tears prick my eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Thank you. Robert, I won't let you down. You never have, he said simply. As my team filed out, chattering excitedly about the dramatic turn of events, I remained behind with Robert, the man who'd mentored me, protected me, and ultimately trusted me to save his company, looked every one of his 71 years. I'm sorry it had to be Bradley, I said quietly. So am I, he replied. But you did what needed to be done, that's why. You're the daughter I should have had. We stood there in comfortable silence, 2 warriors surveying the battlefield after a necessary but painful victory. 3 days later, Bradley made his move. I should have expected it. Cornered animals always lash out. The emergency board meeting was called for 9 a.m. sharp, and when I walked into the boardroom, Bradley was already there, out on bail, wearing his most expensive suit, flanked by 2 attorneys from Kirkland and Ellis. Natalie. He greeted me with a predator's smile. Thank you for joining us. The board members looked uncomfortable. Richard Blackstone, our lead independent director, cleared his throat. Natalie, Bradley has raised some serious allegations about your conduct. We felt obligated to hear him out. I took my seat, noticing Robert's absence. Where's Robert? My father is too ill to attend, Bradley said smoothly. His doctors have advised complete rest, which is why this meeting is so critical. One of his lawyers, a sharp-faced woman named Catherine Walsh, opened a leather folder. Miss Harper, are you aware that recording individuals without their knowledge is a felony in many states? Colorado is a one-party consent state, I replied calmly. I was party to every conversation I recorded. But you accessed private company emails without authorization. The second lawyer, James Thornton, added, corporate espionage is a serious charge. I accessed emails on Sterling Dynamics servers in my capacity as CFO investigating financial irregularities. Every action I took was within my fiduciary duty to protect shareholder interests. Bradley leaned forward. You orchestrated a witch hunt based on personal animosity. You've had it out for me since day one, jealous of my relationship with my father, my position as heir apparent. Heir apparent. I almost laughed. You were VP of Strategic Initiatives, a title Robert created to keep you away from anything important. See? Bradley turned to the board. The contempt, the hostility. She manipulated my father in his weakened state, convinced him to turn against his own son. This entire fraud allegation is fabricated. Richard Blackstone shifted uncomfortably. Natalie, the evidence you presented, can you prove its authenticity? I opened my laptop, connecting it to the boardroom screen. Every document has been verified by Morrison Forensic Accounting, an independent firm. Every email has metadata proving its authenticity. Every bank transfer has corresponding records from multiple financial institutions. Forged, Bradley insisted. She had 8 months to fabricate this elaborate frame job. Then explain this, I said, pulling up a new file. Security footage from Sterling Dynamics lobby. January 15th, 10:47 p.m. That's you entering the building. At 11:14 p.m., our servers show someone using your access code to approve the first fraudulent transfer to Meridian Solutions. The video played, showing Bradley clearly entering the building, looking around furtively. Circumstantial, Walsh argued. Being in the building isn't a crime. No, but this is. I clicked to another file. Audio recording from Sterling's own office. Dated March 3rd. Robert had installed a recording system after the second break-in attempt last year. He forgot to tell you about it, didn't he? Bradley. Robert's voice came through the speakers. Bradley, these consulting fees don't make sense. $90,000 to companies I've never heard of. Then Bradley. Dad, you need to trust me. I'm building relationships for the future. Sometimes that requires discretionary spending. Robert, discretionary spending comes from your budget, not hidden in operational expenses. Bradley. What you don't know won't hurt the quarterly reports. The board members exchanged glances. Bradley's lawyers huddled for a whispered conference. Additionally, I continued, Phoenix, your co-conspirator, has agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Real name, Marcus Chen. He's provided emails, text messages, and recordings of your planning sessions. That was a calculated lie. We hadn't found Phoenix yet, but Bradley didn't know that. His face went pale. He's lying. Whatever he told you is corroborated by financial evidence. I interrupted. Board members, you have a choice. Stand behind Bradley and risk personal liability when the FBI expands their investigation to include board oversight failures, or acknowledge the evidence and protect Sterling Dynamics. Margaret Chen, our longest-serving board member, spoke up. Bradley, can you explain the $900,000 you tried to transfer 3 days ago? Legitimate consulting fees, Bradley said, but his voice wavered. To companies that don't exist. Tom Rodriguez said from the doorway. He entered carrying a box of documents. I've been subpoenaed to provide these records to the FBI. Thought the board should see them first. Richard Blackstone stood. I move to formally terminate Bradley Sterling's employment with Sterling Dynamics, revoke his building access, and cooperate fully with federal investigators. Second, Margaret said immediately. You can't do this, Bradley shouted, jumping to his feet. I own 51% of this company. No, a familiar voice said from the speakerphone. I do. Robert's voice was clear and strong. I'm calling from Presbyterian St. Luke's with my attorney present. The power of attorney Bradley claims to have was revoked 72 hours ago when doctors declared me mentally competent. Bradley, you own exactly 0% of Sterling Dynamics. Dad, please. The vote. Robert continued. To terminate Bradley and ban him from company property. All in favor. Every hand rose except Bradley's. Motion carried, Richard announced. Security will escort you out, Mr. Sterling. Bradley looked around wildly, his carefully constructed plan crumbling. This isn't over. I'll sue every one of you. Bradley. Catherine Walsh, his own attorney, interrupted. Stop talking, now! 2 security guards entered. Bradley shook them off, standing on his own. He looked at me with pure hatred. You destroyed my life. No, I replied quietly. You did that yourself. I just documented it. As security escorted him out, Bradley turned one last time. My father will regret this. You'll all regret this. The boardroom door closed behind him with a definitive click. Richard Blackstone sighed heavily. Natalie, the board owes you an apology for entertaining his accusations. No apology needed, I said, closing my laptop. You did your due diligence. That's all anyone can ask. Robert's voice came through the speaker again. Natalie, stay after the others leave. We need to discuss your new role. As the board members filed out, offering handshakes and words of support, I realized the weight that had been crushing my chest for 8 months was finally lifting. Bradley was gone. Sterling Dynamics was safe. But somehow, I knew Bradley's final threat wasn't empty. This wasn't over. Not yet. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver was a monument to justice, or at least that's what the architecture suggested. 6 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, I sat in the witness chair, my hands still tingling from the oath I'd just sworn. The courtroom was packed with media, Sterling Dynamics employees, and curious observers who'd been following the scandal that made national headlines, CEO's son embezzles millions in family business betrayal. Bradley sat at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a far cry from his usual Armani. His bail had been revoked after he'd attempted to flee to Costa Rica, a spectacularly stupid move that had added flight risk to his charges. His new lawyers, public defenders after his assets were frozen, looked overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence. Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Reeves stood before me, her voice clear and confident. Miss Harper, please describe what happened on September 15th of this year. I leaned toward the microphone. That was the day Bradley Sterling attempted to coerce my financial team into processing $900,000 in fraudulent wire transfers. Objection, Bradley's lawyer called out. Alleged fraudulent transfers. Sustained, Judge Harrison said. The jury will determine fraud. Diana nodded. Let me rephrase. What specifically did Mr. Sterling request? He demanded immediate wire transfers to 5 companies: Synergy Global Advisors, Quantum Strategic Solutions, Peak Performance Partners, Meridian Analytics, and Crown Consulting Group. He wanted the money transferred by close of business, without standard documentation or approval processes. What made you suspicious of these companies? I pulled up the documentation on the screen before me. 3 of them matched the pattern of shell companies I'd been investigating for 8 months. Same registration structure, same type of virtual addresses, same generic websites with stock photography. And what did your investigation reveal? That Bradley Sterling had created an elaborate network of fake companies to siphon money from Sterling Dynamics, $2.6 million over 8 months, with plans to steal another $900,000 before his father recovered from his stroke. Bradley suddenly stood up, despite his lawyer's attempts to restrain him. She's lying. This whole thing is a setup. She wanted the company for herself. Judge Harrison's gavel came down hard. Mr. Sterling, control yourself or you'll be removed from the courtroom. Let him speak, I said calmly, looking directly at Bradley. I want the jury to see who he really is. Bradley's face contorted with rage. You manipulated my father. You turned him against me. You've been planning this for years, waiting for your chance to steal everything. Is that why you tried to hack our financial systems? I asked, knowing the prosecution would object, but wanting the jury to hear it. Objection, both lawyers shouted simultaneously. Sustained. Miss Harper, please only answer the questions posed by counsel. Diana Reeves smiled slightly. Actually, Your Honor, that leads perfectly to my next question. Miss Harper, were there attempts to breach Sterling Dynamics' financial systems? Yes. Our IT director documented 3 attempts to override security protocols using sophisticated spoofing techniques. The attempts were traced to IP addresses associated with Bradley Sterling's devices. The prosecution presented exhibit after exhibit: forged invoices, fake contracts, email exchanges between Bradley and his co-conspirator. Each piece of evidence was another nail in his coffin. But the moment that truly sealed his fate came when Diana played the audio recording from the March meeting. Bradley's own voice filled the courtroom. "What you don't know won't hurt the quarterly reports." Several jury members shook their heads in disgust. During cross-examination, Bradley's lawyer tried desperately to paint me as a vindictive employee with a grudge. "Isn't it true, Miss Harper, that you resented Bradley Sterling's position as the CEO's son?" "I resented his theft of company funds," I replied evenly. "His position as Robert's son is what made this tragedy so painful for everyone involved." "You claim to have discovered this alleged fraud 8 months ago. Why didn't you report it immediately?" "Because accusations against the CEO's son require ironclad proof. I needed to be absolutely certain, with evidence that would stand up in court. Rushing would have meant Bradley could destroy evidence and escape justice." "Or you needed time to fabricate evidence." I looked at the jury, making eye contact with each member. "Every document has been independently verified. Every financial transaction has been confirmed by multiple banks. The FBI's forensic accountants have validated everything. If I could fabricate that level of evidence, I wouldn't be a CFO, I'd be a criminal mastermind." A few jury members actually smiled. The lawyer pressed on. "You stand to gain significantly from Bradley Sterling's removal, don't you? You've been promoted to president and COO?" "Yes." "With a substantial salary increase?" "Yes." "And you're in line to become CEO when Robert Sterling retires?" "That's the board's decision. But yes, I've been mentioned as a candidate." "So you had every motive to frame Bradley Sterling?" I leaned forward. "I had every motive to protect Sterling Dynamics from someone who was destroying it from within. My promotion came after the evidence was revealed, not before, and frankly, dealing with this mess has been the hardest thing I've done in my career. If I wanted an easy path to CEO, watching Robert Sterling's son betray him wasn't it." The courtroom fell silent. Even Bradley stopped fidgeting. Then came the moment that broke everything wide open. Diana Reeves called a surprise witness, Marcus Chen Phoenix. The man who walked in looked nothing like what I'd expected. Thin, nervous, wearing an ill-fitting suit. Marcus Chen was a computer programmer who'd gotten in over his head. In exchange for immunity, he laid out the entire scheme: how Bradley had recruited him, how they'd created the shell companies, how they'd planned to drain millions more before Robert could recover. "He said his father was dying," Marcus testified, his voice shaking. "He said the old man would never know, and once Bradley had control, he'd make it all legitimate. I knew it was wrong, but he promised me $200,000. I needed the money for my mother's cancer treatment." Bradley's face went from red to white to green as Marcus produced email after email, text after text, recorded phone calls where Bradley explicitly discussed the embezzlement scheme. The final blow came when Marcus revealed something even I hadn't known. Bradley had taken out a $3 million life insurance policy on his father 6 months before the stroke. He kept saying how convenient it would be if the old man would just die already. The courtroom erupted. Robert Sterling, who'd been sitting in the gallery, had to be helped out of the room. Bradley's lawyers immediately asked for a recess, but the damage was done. When we returned, Bradley had been removed from the courtroom for his own safety. Several Sterling Dynamics employees had to be restrained. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, money laundering, 27 counts in total. As the verdict was read, I felt no joy, only a profound sadness. I looked back at Robert, tears streaming down his weathered face as he watched his only son's life effectively end. Bradley would face up to 20 years in federal prison. Justice had been served, but the victory tasted like ashes. 6 months later, I stood in the CEO's office, my office now watching the Denver skyline paint itself gold in the setting sun. The nameplate on the desk read, Natalie Harper, Chief Executive Officer. Robert had officially retired 2 weeks after Bradley's sentencing, his health and spirit broken by his son's betrayal. The transformation of Sterling Dynamics had been swift but necessary. We'd implemented new financial controls, redundant approval systems, and mandatory ethics training that some called excessive, but I called essential. Trust, once shattered, takes years to rebuild. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Tom Rodriguez entered, now my CFO. "Natalie, there's something you should see." He handed me a letter, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Institution in Littleton, Colorado. Bradley's handwriting was unmistakable. "Natalie," it read, "I've had 6 months to think about everything. 6 months of concrete walls and iron bars that you put around me. But here's what you don't understand. I was trying to save Sterling Dynamics from mediocrity. My father built a regional company and was content to keep it small. Safe, boring. I had vision. I had ambition. The money I took was an investment in a bigger future. You call it theft. I call it venture capital. One day, when Sterling Dynamics crumbles under your conservative leadership, remember that you killed the one person who could have made it great. This isn't over. Even from here, I have friends, connections, people who believe in my vision. Watch your back. Bradley Sterling." I folded the letter carefully and fed it into the shredder. Tom watched with concern. "Should we alert the FBI?" "Already done," I said, showing him my phone. "I forwarded a photo to Agent Jeffries before you knocked. Bradley just violated his plea agreement by threatening me. He'll likely get another 5 years added to his sentence." Tom shook his head. "He never learns, does he?" "No," I said quietly. "And that's the real tragedy. Robert Sterling spent his whole life building something meaningful, something that employed thousands of people and supported their families. And Bradley was willing to destroy it all for greed and ego." My phone buzzed. A text from Robert. "Saw the news about the letter. I'm sorry. Thank you for everything. You're the child I wish I'd had." I typed back, "You gave me a chance when no one else would. That's all a real parent needs to do." Later that evening, I called an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the main floor auditorium, nearly 500 faces looking up at me with a mixture of respect and expectation. "6 months ago," I began, "Sterling Dynamics faced an existential threat, not from competitors or market forces, but from within. We survived because people like Tom Rodriguez, Kevin Park, and every member of our finance team had the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it was dangerous." Applause rippled through the crowd. "But survival isn't enough," I continued. "We need to thrive. That's why I'm announcing Project Phoenix, not named after Bradley's co-conspirator, but after what we're doing rising from the ashes stronger than before. We're investing $50 million in new technology, expanding our manufacturing capabilities, and most importantly, implementing profit sharing for all employees." The applause became thunderous. Bradley Sterling thought greed was vision. He thought theft was investment. He was wrong. Real vision is building something that lasts. Real investment is in people. Every single one of you is why Sterling Dynamics will not just survive, but dominate our industry for the next generation. As the crowd dispersed, chattering excitedly about the announcements, Sarah Martinez approached me. "Natalie, can I ask you something? Do you ever regret how it all went down? I mean, Bradley was family to Robert." I thought about it for a moment. Cancer is family to the cells it grows from, too. That doesn't mean you don't cut it out to save the body. She nodded, understanding. That night, I returned to my office, Robert's old office, and found him sitting in one of the guest chairs, looking older than his 71 years, but somehow at peace. "I wanted to see you in that chair," he said simply. "You wear it well." "Robert, about Bradley's letter." He held up a hand. "The FBI already briefed me. My son made his choices. You saved my company. Probably saved lives considering how unsafe those shell companies' supposed consulting would have been. You did what I couldn't, you stopped him." "I'm sorry it had to happen at all." Robert stood, moving toward the door. "You know what the hardest part is? It's not the betrayal or the embarrassment. It's knowing that somewhere I failed as a father. I gave him everything except the one thing he needed: boundaries.
You loved him, I said. That's not a failure.
No, Robert replied, pausing at the door. But sometimes love means being willing to let someone face the consequences of their actions. You taught me that, Natalie. You showed me that protecting Bradley from himself was destroying everything else I cared about. After he left, I stood at the window again, watching the city lights twinkle to life. My reflection stared back older, wearier, but stronger. The naive junior accountant who'd walked into Sterling Dynamics 15 years ago was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is the willingness to expose the truth, no matter how painful. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Bradley Sterling, sentenced to additional 5 years for threatening CEO. I deleted it without reading the details. Bradley was the past. Sterling Dynamics' future was what mattered now. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed a new addition to the desk, a small plaque Robert must have placed there. It read, "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching, and especially when everyone is." I smiled, turned off the lights, and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the chance to build something truly great from the ashes of betrayal. Bradley had been wrong about one thing: this was over, his story. Anyway, mine was just beginning. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in my position? Sometimes the hardest battles aren't with strangers, but with those who should have been family.